So happy to be here with you, even in this pre-recorded way, and sorry I'm not able to join you live. I'm going to go ahead and jump into my remarks, which are about ways to enhance well-being for ourselves, our family, our friends, our staff, our residents. When we are able to develop skills for ourselves and understand ways to nurture and maintain our own resilience, it actually becomes kind of a natural extension that we can offer this to others as well. So again, I want to thank Karen and Jackie for inviting me to be with you, and I want to thank you for all that you do and for being here and for listening. I have two goals. One is to offer you a framework for the experience that we have all been through over these last 15 months in hopes that it will help you transform that experience and to use coping skills that result not just in the restoration of balance, which would be sufficient unto itself, but also to be transformative, to allow us to emerge from this with kind of a growth mindset and ways that we can come back better than before. I don't need to tell you, but I do like to stop for a moment to reflect that it's been one heck of a year. As if the coronavirus pandemic weren't enough on its own, it's been accompanied by an infodemic, a pandemic within the pandemic, as the World Health Organization calls it, in which we have had not only like a lot of information, but also misinformation and disinformation. In our efforts to mitigate the virus and to manage it, we went into a quarantine, a lockdown, a shutdown, exacerbating already existing tendencies and experiences of isolation and social isolation. And this has occurred against the backdrop of a great deal of social unrest as the coronavirus exposed more and more health inequities and health disparities. And then we had the summer of Black Lives Matter, um, following the death of George Floyd. Into all of this, of course, has been the emergence of something hopeful, which is the vaccination. Unfortunately, having a vaccine available has also highlighted again some divisions within our society. And we have now the maskers and the anti-maskers, the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. And just at a time when we really need to come together, these divisive pulls in society continue to be a presence. But I'm very hopeful that we are on the brink of recognizing that there is more that unites us than divides us. And I say that because no one has been untouched by this pandemic. No one has been untouched by the awareness of racial and social inequities. No one has been untouched by the political divisiveness. And no one can deny just how connected we really are. The impact on us collectively and individually has been on every aspect of our being, biologically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. And this stress takes its toll because we have been stressed in ways that cause us to deal with negative experiences that we're not so good at. We're not so good, particularly in Western culture, with dealing with uncertainty. We like things to be either or, this or that, good and bad. We have this tendency towards duality and towards separating things. But in fact, what we've had to deal with is a great deal of uncertainty. And so it could teach us something about the notion of thinking more in a both and kind of way. We've also had a certain sense of helplessness, another state of being that humans are not that comfortable with. And so we've had to adapt to that and to become less helpless by engaging more creative solutions. The feeling of being out of control is another state that causes a great deal of stress because we're not really designed to feel out of control without wanting to regain control, which hasn't been so easy. Look around, we are remarkably resilient. We have shown grit and determination and compassion. We have been creative, even in our frustration and in our sorrow, in our anger. We have found ways to keep going. And yet, and no surprise, we're getting really tired. And This is understandable, I think, when you look at what we've been through in the context of disaster recovery. Sorry. When you look at the context of the phases of disaster recovery that have been well studied and that are well known. This graph, by the way, comes from SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, if you wanted to look it up. But it basically describes how every disaster, man-made or natural, goes through a particular kind of cycle. And they may revisit these cycles over time. And what I would say now is that we are collectively somewhere in the disillusionment and reconstruction phase, coming out of disillusionment into reconstruction. And we are going to be on different points along this recovery. And when you're thinking about yourselves or your own organizations, it's useful, I think, to use this frame to get a handle on where you might be and what might need to be done to move out of and to move forward from the phase that you are in. But it's no wonder that at this point, many of us are feeling kind of distracted, forgetful, running around in circles, maybe feeling a little less creative. And in my experience, human and health professionals tend to ask of themselves that they not feel this way, that they not be tired, that they not ever stop having creative solutions. And yet, what people are experiencing, and from my point of view, are very normal reactions to a uniquely abnormal set of circumstances. Well, we need a reboot. To describe it is insufficient. We need to say, well, how can we take this understanding of what's happening in our brains and actually apply it to allow us to keep going? Because this pandemic experience is not over yet. We're in a different phase of it, and we need to re-engage the best parts of our brain. So let me tell you what I think is happening. In the face of this relentless, uncontrollable stress, these feelings of helplessness, uncertainty, loss of control, the amygdala, which is the survivor part of the brain, sends out all these neurochemicals and literally shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of our wisdom, our planning, our judgment, our compassion, and so forth. And so what we need to do is actually reclaim that prefrontal cortex. Now, we don't have time to discuss this, so I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, but I want you to know that there are a lot of resources online that from which you can select the antidotes that will work for you. The amygdala is that survivor part of the brain that you're familiar with as the fight or flight response part of the brain. In the face of danger, the amygdala sends out these signals, shuts down the thinking part so that we can act and react quickly. Okay, it's about action. And so, for example, if you're driving down the highway, somebody pulls out in front of you, you have some options. You can swerve to avoid a collision. You can brake to avoid a collision. You can swear, but probably won't avoid the collision. But the important thing to realize is that in the face of an immediate danger, you don't think about those choices. You do one of them. And this is because the amygdala must shut down the thinking parts so that we're not pausing to reflect on the best course of action. We have to choose one immediately. Unfortunately, everything in our society is compelling us to act like we're just amygdalas, whether it is where you get your news, whether it is conversation, whether it is information, the sort of whole infodemic. Everything is keeping us on high alert. And so we have an overactivated amygdala, and here's what you do about it. One is to remove the stressor. We're trying to wrestle that coronavirus, but we're not there yet. So one of the things that you can do is reduce your exposure to information about it. I don't mean head in sand. I mean head turning away, not always being on a 24/7 news cycle just because one is running. So remove the stressor. 3 other things that you can do to tone down the amygdala: physical exercise, 30 minutes a day, deep breathing throughout the day, which exactly what it says. Through the nose slowly, hold it, out slowly. Most of the time we breathe pretty shallowly. Throughout the day, breathe deeply. This resets Your autonomic nervous system, it signals to the amygdala, you can chill, I've got this, we are not in danger. And then finally, mindfulness practice. Here's a quick one for you. You can take a mindfulness course, and I recommend some of them, but you can also just get in the mental habit of being mindful. You can, for example, right here now while we're talking, look around and see 3 things in your field of vision. You can feel 3 sensations: your feet on the ground, your bottom in a seat, your air from a fan coming across your face, whatever it is. But 3 senses: hear the noise of the fan, hear the outside lawnmower, hear people talking in the background. When you engage 3 senses in the immediate moment, you have also become mindful and activated the next part of your brain that I want to tell you about, which is the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, the anterior cingulate cortex, part of this whole corticolimbic system, has also been underactivated in the face of this overactivated, fear-based, high alert, super vigilant amygdala. We want to turn that down a little bit. And one of the ways that we do it is through being mindful, acknowledging our situation, because the message that we want to keep sending to this more primitive part is that we're back to top-down control. We're back to engaging the best parts of our brain, not just the primitive parts of our brain. So the other way that we do it is to acknowledge our situation. We acknowledge that this has been hard. We acknowledge that we ought not expect that we are infinitely resilient without getting tired. We ought not expect not to feel anger or grief or loss. And we have to name those, acknowledge them. And to acknowledge also imbalance, that in spite of it all, there are actually some good things that have happened. And so a daily nighttime practice is what Duke University calls 3 good things. You can look that up as well. Because all this is in the service of reclaiming that prefrontal cortex, because that's what we need now to enhance our own well-being and that of others. We have to bring the prefrontal cortex back online. And the way that we do that is to start using it. We dampen the amygdala. We engage the anterior cingulate cortex by acknowledging our situation. And then we get down to the business of solving for isolation, solving for the infodemic, solving for the remaining challenges of the pandemic, be it around vaccinations or continuing to try to keep people safe from becoming infected. People who study disasters frame this in terms of the 3 C's. And from an organizational standpoint, what you want to look for are ways to bring a sense of control back to the organization, back to the team. What do we have control over? Name it, claim it, frame it, get to work on it. And it may be something as simple as the way you do a schedule, giving individuals flex scheduling. Whatever it is, the notion here is that teams and individuals need to be reminded of very concretely what they do have control over and then to exercise it. The second C, the second psychological principle that's proven to be helpful in disasters, is this notion of coherence, making meaning, giving shape to what we have been through. And to do this always through connection with our families, our friends, with our coworkers, with our colleagues, with our staff, and with residents, reinforcing those connections, recognizing that we are in it together, and really putting that at the fore. I did some work in New Orleans after Katrina, and one of the things that emerged from that particular disaster was the notion of psychological preparedness. As one administrator put it to me, we can have the best evacuation plans, the best shelter-in-place plans in the world, but they are all for naught if we are not psychologically prepared to carry them out. And I've thought about that so much in these last 15 months as we focus on infection control, and it's critically important. But you can have the best infection control plans in the world, and if your team isn't ready, they're not going to be carried out, whatever and however good the intentions to do so. The three key elements of psychological preparedness is a sense of being part of a team. We are truly in this together, which means administrators show up on the front lines as well. A sense of confidence has to be instilled. As hard as it is, we can do this. We've got this. We have the tools. We know how to do it. And when we're feeling exhausted, we know how to replenish. And we do that by rebuilding our emotional reserves, by really nurturing mind, body, and spirit in an active, conscious, don't take it for granted kind of way. What I'm beginning to work on and what I'm beginning to think a lot about, however, is the notion of post-pandemic positive growth. And this is built on work from the early 1990s in positive psychology, looking at individual trauma. And you can see in the sort of left-hand side of this graphic an idea that most of the time when we have been hit with a big stress or a trauma, our coping leads us in the direction of restoring balance, homeostasis, getting back on our feet. And in fact, people talk about resilience, knock me down, I get back up, knock me down, I get back up. But on the right hand of this, what we have really is knock me down and I may stay down, you may transform me, or I may grow from it. And this growth mindset is what we're now working to instill in all of us who are experiencing and have been experiencing this stress. And it actually happens that there are interventions that we can make that will point us in that positive, transformational, coping direction. You start with thinking for yourselves about one positive lesson or discovery that you've made during this pandemic that you can take with you into the future. And you've just started your first step towards positive growth in the post-pandemic period. So to recap, please think about actively replenishing your body, your mind, your spirit. You know the health basics: eat well, sleep well, don't drink too much, alcohol that is, avoid tobacco, exercise every day, and so forth. Attend to your spiritual practice, whatever that may be, and reclaim your prefrontal cortices. Reclaim and recharge and rekindle a sense of community, and keep your heart mind, your body mind open to change. There is such a pull towards just get back to normal, whatever that might mean. And we want to counterbalance that with, let's pause for a moment and reflect. What do we want to take forward with us that we didn't have before? Thanks again for listening.